Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Connecticut's Old State House for the very first in our three-part limited series, Control Shift Democracy, How AI is Changing Government. My name is Mariana Garcia. I'm the Public Programs Manager here at the Old State House, and we are just so delighted to have you all join us for this program today to explore the transformative impact on artificial intelligence on our government and on our civic life. In the era where technology is rapidly advancing, it is crucial to understand how AI is reshaping the way our government operates. From enhancing decision-making processes to improving public services, AI holds immense potential to revolutionize our governance. However, with these advancements come significant responsibilities and challenges, including security concerns, ensuring ethical use, and of course the realities of digital inequity. At the heart of this transformation lies the importance of civic participation. As citizens, our involvement and engagement in these conversations in shaping the future of how these technologies will affect our democracy, it is through these active participations, of which of course requires understanding and acknowledgement that we can ensure that AI is leveraged for the public good, promoting fairness, inclusivity, and accountability. This is why we've created this program series, so that we can start a conversation between all of us, so that we can be better prepared for the future that awaits us with these technologies, which are here to stay, I believe. And I should say that everything I just said was created by ChatGPT. So today we are joined by a very distinguished panel of experts. We're still waiting for one more speaker. But we have here with us today Connecticut State Senator James Maroney, Dr. Belina de Abreu, President of the International Council for Media Literacy, and we will be joined soon by Dr. Bahid Besadan, Professor in Computer and Data Sciences at the University of New Haven. And we were just also joined, he will be with us here shortly, Commissioner Daniel O'Keefe of the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. So how is this going to work? I'm going to have a conversation with our panelists. I have a list of questions here, and also a couple of questions that you have sent us while you were registering for this program. Our conversation will last about 45 minutes, and then after that we are going to open the floor for a Q&A for about 50 more minutes. And then at the very end, we are going to have a more informal conversation. We'll take a crack at those refreshments over there. And we have a couple of icebreaker questions on the Post-it notes on the tables there at the back of the room. And that is going to be how this is going to work out. So if any of you have any questions during the Q&A at the very end, just raise your hand and one of my colleagues will come over to you with a microphone. Please do wait for the microphone. Tonight is being recorded and live stream on YouTube and Facebook. So we do need you to have the microphone so that people online and the recording can hear your question. So now, this is, as I said, the first on a three-part series we're starting tonight. The next one will be on next Thursday, July the 18th, also at 6 p.m. And then the very last one will be on July 25th, which is the following Thursday, also at 6 p.m. And we hope to see you for all three of these programs here at the Old State House. Thank you so much for coming. And now, please allow me to introduce our distinguished guests. All right, so Commissioner Dan O'Keefe. Dan was nominated by Governor Ned Lamont as Commissioner for the Department of Economic and Community Development in November of 2023. He has served as the state of Connecticut's first Chief Innovation Officer since July 2023. Dan is a passionate advocate for the economy and community throughout Connecticut, focusing on economic growth, workforce development, vibrant communities, and job creation. Before entering public service, Dan was a technology investor for 25 years, investing in high-growth, innovative companies in software, consumer, and fintech markets. Thank you. Companies that went on to create tens of thousands of jobs. Dan also serves as a board member and chairperson emeritus in the Opportunity Network, an education and career skills-focused nonprofit reaching over 40,000 high-potential students from historically marginalized communities. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us tonight. And now Senator James Maroney is also back. He's been a speaker here at the Old State House before. We're happy to have him back. Senator James Maroney was first elected to represent the 14th District of Milford in 2018, before being elected to the Senate. He was a state representative of the 119th District. Senator Maroney has been at the forefront of Connecticut's efforts to legislate AI. He co-chaired the Connecticut Artificial Intelligence Task Force, which aims to study and recommend possible regulations of AI use in Connecticut. Earlier this year, Senator Maroney was also named to the Leadership Council of the Future of Privacy Forum's Center for Artificial Intelligence. The latest accomplishments he has achieved as he continues to deepen his knowledge and expertise of emerging use of functions of AI. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us tonight. And last but not least, Belina de Abreu, Dr. Belina de Abreu, is a global media literacy educator. She serves as the international expert to the Forum on Media and Information Literacy for UNESCO, Communications and Information section. Her research interests include media and information literacy education, educational technology, global perspectives, critical thinking, privacy and data, civil discourse, young adults, and teacher training. She is also the founder of the International Media Literacy Research Symposium and serves as the president of the International Council for Media Literacy. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. And we will be joined again, hopefully soon, by Dr. Vahid Abdesan, who has been stuck in traffic, but hopefully he will be with us soon. So why don't we begin with our questions? And again, if you have any questions, we will have a short Q&A at the very end. Okay, so Senator, perhaps you can help us with this question, but I would like to start off with a little vocabulary, so that we're all on the same baseline as we talk about these complicated topics. So can you maybe define AI, and why do you believe we're seeing such a boom in AI conversations nowadays?
Thanks for giving me the easy question to start off. So I think vocabulary is critical. Right, and I think a lot of times we talk past each other, and so just establishing that baseline, because a lot of people, when I tell constituents that I'm working on AI legislation, they're like, ooh, that's scary, and it's not, right? And it's just knowing what it is. And the term AI was coined in 1956 at a Dartmouth Computer Science Conference, and basically it's just using machines to approximate human thinking, right? I think why it's become so popular and so prevalent. And so actually the first book that was published using generative AI was 1993, a book called Just This Once that was written on a generative AI that was on someone's Apple Mac. And according to its Amazon reviews, it's decidedly mediocre. So we don't need to read it, I guess. But what happened is, as most people here, when they first heard of AI, right? Because AI, everyone's using it every day, right? It's part of Google Maps. At its heart, what AI is a prediction machine. There's a great book called Prediction Machines, so you can understand what is artificial intelligence, and it's predicting, right? And so Google Maps is predicting the turns you should make to get to where you want to go in the quickest time, right? And it's running through all of these calculations to make that prediction. ChatGPT is predicting what words you want to hear in response to the words it's put in, and it's broken down, and it does all these through neural networks, and there are different ways that it studies trillions of points of data, right, to draw these connections, right? And at its heart, if we all remember back to school, we were like aligned, the equation of a line, right, y equals mx plus b if we have 2 points. But sometimes points may be on a sign graph or another formula, and so as they put in more data, they figure out the connection between these points so that it allows it to predict what we want to know in response. And why are we all talking about it? Because on November 30th of 2022, November 30th, 2022, ChatGPT was launched. And now all of a sudden, it's in our phones. It's in everyone's hands, and they can see what this is. And I think that's, if you go back in history, like why something has to be seen to really for us to all talk about it. When there were 2 advances that came around in surgery at the same time. One was anesthesia, which was to impact the patient who was feeling pain, but the other was making sure that you were being more cleanly and using antiseptic and cleaning all of your tools. Now, anesthesia was adopted more quickly because the doctors could see the patient's pain in front of them, right? But the infections would happen weeks after they left the doctor's office. So it took a little while for us to adopt that. So now that we're all seeing what AI is and can be, that's why we have so many conversations about it.
Right. Now it's in our pockets, in our houses.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. And Melina, in your estimation, how knowledgeable do you believe is the average person about AI and what it can actually do, whether they know they're the thing that the senator just described or if it's more of a sci-fi concept?
So I think actually the senator gave a very complex definition really to something that I think we're all sort of still trying to figure out. And I'm going to use a word that I actually hate using now because ChatGPT has learned it, which is that this is nuanced. And I say that because this semester, that is the word that came up from every paper that I received from a student, the word nuance. And I thought, wow, what has happened here? So the Pew Internet and American Life has said that the average person really doesn't understand what AI is. It doesn't pick up on the underlying ways in which it's working. And the way the senator explained it is actually great because it's two-layered, right? We're seeing the visible side, and the invisible side is the part that people are really concerned about. But the visible side of it is literally what we've seen with the ChatGPT, not necessarily because we understand all the other pieces, even though we've all had Alexa or Siri and probably a number of other things that we know that have AI, but we've never actually in our forefront seen it and used it in this way and watched people interact with it and also watched the AI itself kind of pick up on the human factor in a way that was unexpected. And the best example for this would be in the early part of 2023, a month and a half after ChatGPT was out, I believe it was a journalist from the New York Times, decided to have a conversation with the Bing AI. And the Bing AI conversation went off the rails because he allowed the AI to basically be free in its thinking. And the transcript, if you ever get a chance to read it, ended up being about 10 pages, and the AI gave itself its name. It called itself Sydney. It started to speak with emojis, which was unexpected, and eventually had a rather disturbing conversation with the journalist where it basically was saying to the journalist that you are in love with me, you are not in love with your wife, you want to be with me, and he eventually just closed the computer. He was like, wow, this was not where I thought this was going to go. As most people would be really nervous about if this had happened to them. And then he went back to the Bing developers and they said, well, that wasn't what was supposed to happen. Okay, so, but here is where we're seeing the line that we're uncertain about. And I think people are worried about the things that we see in movies, like the iRobots and you know, all those other, Terminator. Is that really what's going to happen to us? And there's a little, you know, I think there's justification in that because we really don't understand exactly its processes within our own lives.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Can I maybe amplify the point a little bit? You
Please.
asked the question, how many, you know, does your average consumer know what AI is or what it means? And I would suggest that the average consumer doesn't know, that none of us know, that someone who purports to be an expert doesn't know, because it is one of the most rapid adoptions of technology that I've witnessed in my career. You know, it was mentioned in my bio, I spent 25 years investing in technology companies. When I started in the mid-1990s, I had no idea that I would be sitting here in 2024 and that my kids would have no idea what a channel was. You know, that they could watch any piece of content in the entire world at any moment on their phones. The use cases that technology can ultimately create are very hard for us to picture when you're in the midst of it. And the other thing I would say is what's happening here, I think, is even more fundamental. You know, what we're seeing now is an emergence and a step function of compute. This is quantum computing, which we can go on a whole different path about quantum. But it's essentially allowing the compute processing power to become exponential. And that's happening at the exact same time that we're seeing this emergence in the consumer awareness and the broader adoption of artificial intelligence. Those two things happening at the same time, in my mind, is as if the emergence of the semiconductor and the integrated circuit, what happened in the 1950s and 1960s, happened at the same time as the emergence of the consumer internet, which happened 40 years later. It's the emergence of a step function change in compute. At the exact same time, we're seeing a step function change in the ability to interpret the product, what that compute produces. So that is actually, I wish I could sit here and tell you guys what that's going to mean. I have lots of big ideas. I think, you know, and I'm not being hyperbolic here, the cure for cancer. This is going to allow us to model and understand drug discovery and interactions with the human body without having to test it on humans. So it's going to increase the cycles that we can start to analyze, the implications of certain approaches in drugs and drug discovery and biotech. So the reason why I kind of give all of that is I know there are risks here, and we spend a lot of time talking about those risks. But there's also incredible opportunities, and I tend to be a net optimist, so I spend a lot more time focusing on what the opportunities are, but that doesn't mean I ignore the risks. I just want to make sure we also talk about the positive that's in front of us.
No, absolutely. Thank you. All right, so we've been joined by Dr. Vahid Betsadan. That's correct. Thank you. All right, so thank you so much for joining us. But before we ask you a question, Senator and Commissioner, I was wondering, speaking of all the net positives that AI could do, how do you think artificial intelligence could affect government operations, and what are the potential benefits and challenges associated with its implementation? And also, how, if in any way, is AI already being used in Connecticut government?
Give it to the government guy?
I'll follow.
And I will say, so executive branch, legislative branch, I'm new to public service, so I've been doing this for a year, so I'm still learning. But what I would say is, how could AI start to really have positive implications? The first is you relate to traffic. One, it could certainly address the issues that are associated with traffic. I once got asked on the panel, in what year do I think it will become illegal for humans to drive? And that's not outside of the realm of possibility in many of our lifetimes. So when I think AI has real interesting implications in around the application and delivery of government services is leveraging data to find challenges and issues and things that aren't obvious to the human brain or the human eye that may be correlated, finding ways to actually address some of the issues we have, like systemic poverty, systemic inequity, finding ways to really get to the core of some of these issues in ways that we didn't expect before. And then to start to deploy it. Now that being said, right now we're restricted. So the day I showed up to my first day of government service, I had to sign a form that said I won't use AI in the application of my work. Now why is that? That's because there's a concern that AI could introduce systemic bias. And obviously I am a steward of taxpayer dollars. I'm a steward, as we all are, of taxpayer dollars. We take that very seriously, and so we have to make sure that we're not going to that the technology is not going to introduce those challenges. I signed the form and was immediately in violation of it because AI is in every single thing I use every day. If you search on Google, if you use Apple Maps, if you literally use Microsoft's Office suite, you are using AI. So I also think we kind of have to step back a little bit and say, look, I understand the boogeyman. We have to be very careful about how these technologies are deployed and how we use them every day. But I for one, and I'll do it a second time, I want to focus on the net positive implications of these technologies and then recognize the fact that as challenges are introduced, that we all agree we're going to have to address them.
Thank you.
And so I actually, in 2023, I did work on the legislation that Senate Bill 1103, which we were one of the first states to regulate government use of AI. And what we had said was, one, citizens have a right to know when AI is being used to make an important decision about them. So every year, starting with December of last year, on the state open data website, they publish an inventory of all of the use cases of where state government is using AI. And so as of last year, it was only 10. None were really being used for making important decisions, right, about people. Judiciary branch also had to publish an inventory, and they said they're using it in various cases, but again, not to use it to make important decisions. Now, why is that important that we step back, right? One is we have to realize, like, when we're in government, if we make a mistake, it's much amplified over if a small business makes a mistake or one of us in private life. And so one of the best cases right now, there are a lot of great cases currently for using AI. One of them is communication, right? Google Translate, you can translate to 140 different languages. Now, an ethical question that comes in regarding that is the mayor of New York City sent out a message, a robocall in 12 different languages. but he didn't disclose that it wasn't his own voice and it wasn't being spoken using Google Translate. So people stopped him in the street. I didn't know you spoke Mandarin, or I didn't know you spoke Farsi. And so that's one of the things where sometimes putting policies and procedures in effect, it makes you stop and think. And so I had read the generative AI policies for the state of Washington, city of Philadelphia, city of Seattle, city of Boston. And their policies were it's okay to use ChatGPT, but you have to disclose it to your constituents, and then you have to say who fact-checked it, who edited it. And I had actually, before I read those, I was thinking of using a plugin to draft response emails for me with constituents. And then I was like, oh, well, one, then I would be taking their data and making it public. But two, I already get people who complain if they think I sent them a form response. So I can't imagine what they would say if they thought ChatGPT was responding to their emails. But again, that pause is important, right? Pausing to stop and think before we do things. And our official law, the way the law said is that DAS had developed policies and procedures, OPM and DAS developed policies and procedures. If they're going to use AI to make an important decision about people's life, they had to do an impact assessment. And so there's a book called Automating Inequality by Virginia Eubanks. And again, this automated decision-making goes back, it's not new. It goes back to 2010, 2011, when a lot of instances of government using AI to make decisions about people getting Medicaid benefits, getting SNAP benefits in LA, the VSPDOT, it ranked homelessness. And so if we're going to use that as a government, we need to test and make sure we're not discriminating. And a lot of times the algorithms discriminated against poor people. And so the example is in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. They were using an algorithm to decide if we're going to investigate instances or allegations of child abuse. And one of the data variables they chose was prior connection to government services. So if you had food stamps at one point, then they, for whatever reason, thought you were more likely to beat your children, or that you had to be investigated, which makes no sense, right? But it created that digital poorhouse. And again, that's something that government services are a critical, consequential decision, just like employment, housing, right? These are important areas that we have in making decisions. So it's important to stop and think. Use cases that are beneficial. There are a lot of great ones. Communicating the chatbots, right? Making government information easier to find. And so workforce development, over a dozen different agencies, I think, in the state of Connecticut have programs for workforce development. If you've lost your job, wouldn't it be great to just have to go to one place to ask the questions? But again, we need to test, because they used a chatbot in New York City and it went off the rails. It was giving people advice on how to cheat on their taxes. People asked questions on if, because they didn't stop using it either. And the other is they asked it if a rat, is it okay to serve cheese if a rat's eaten it already? And it said just to look at the rat bites and determine that it hadn't eaten too much, things like that. So again, as government, we have to be more careful before we use some of these things than you would be if you were in a private industry or an individual.
That's wild.
The other part is that you need to also be aware of language. The actual systemic problem with it is that it understands a specific piece of language based on a repetitive use that has been out there. So it doesn't understand actual language that, say, for example, within a community is used. And so sometimes the words that are being used are actually offensive to some, and that's not taken into consideration as the messaging is being put forth. And that's another reason why I think there needs to be a little bit of a stopgap in between as well.
Maybe I could share an anecdote of how sometimes this gets translated into the executive branch. And by the way, I want to say, the Senator and I work incredibly closely together on these issues. We don't always agree. We respect each other. And so as I say some of these anecdotes, it might sound like we're bickering up here, but we're not. It's just we have two different looks at the same set of information. And so here's an example of how it sort of translates. And it's something I've come to call, again, I'm relatively new to this, but I've come to call it the unintended amplification of legislative intent. Everything that was just described, I think, is with the best of intents, right? I mean, you couldn't argue with anything that was just described. But first, again, I had to sign a form saying I just simply wouldn't use it. Why is that? It's because we have constrained resources. So if you have to go through and inventory every system and figure out what is part of a consequential decision, how it's used, et cetera, what actually happens is people would say, okay, we just won't use it. Until we have the resources, we're able to do that. So whereas every other industry on the planet is leveraging AI to deliver whatever its service is more efficiently, better, quicker, et cetera, We are not. The second thing that happened is I go around the state and I make these presentations about our economy and its growth and all that stuff. And I wanted to include this slide because the governor, if you've ever heard him speak, always uses this phrase about the moving trucks turning around. Has anyone heard this? He'll say, the moving trucks are all leaving the state of Connecticut and finally they're all turning around. So I said to ChatGPT, can you create me an image that shows the moving trucks turning around and going back to Hartford? And I have this super cute image in my presentation that shows thousands of moving trucks going off into Hartford in the distance, and it says, welcome to Hartford. It's awesome. I love it. Compliance made me put a note saying, this is an AI-generated image. It is not real. Congratulations, you're all now safer. So you see what my point is. Sometimes I just think there has to be practical, understanding, and I think we're going to make mistakes. I'm not up here saying let's take everyone's benefits away and none of us want to do that. But I would love to get us a bit more front-footed of saying, what are the positive things we could do with this, while also understanding that we need to be careful. I worry a little bit that the fear of the unknown is holding back what could be an incredible opportunity for our state and our constituents.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right. So, Dr. Betsadan, maybe, and also the Senator could comment a little bit. You already started to speak a little bit on this. But you could comment a little bit on the outcomes of previous AI legislation in other parts of the world. I know there's been some of this over at the European Union and also in California, I believe. So what have been some of the criticisms and praises for those sorts of legislations in other places?
Senator, would you like to take a go at it first, or would you like to go first?
I'll go. Yeah, you have explained.
Well, first of all, apologies for my tardiness.
Commissioner, could you just share the microphone, please?
If we had the right type of AI in our smart cities, I would have got here a bit earlier. I really want to take a crack at defining AI at some point. But before going there, let me try to answer your question. I'm mostly in touch with the technical side. I hear from my colleagues in the UK, in the European Union, about some of the pains that they are going through due to overly restrictive or under-defined regulations. There are certain issues, such as facial recognition, that are heavily regulated in certain regions, including the UK. However, the definition of facial recognition and the scope of applicability of the approved policy seems to be a little vague. Data moderation, data maintenance, storage, and documentation, in other words, the governance of data, is prescribed in regulation or advisories in a way that can be interpreted in many different ways. Similar things, similar efforts have happened here in the US and different states as well. The idea of mandating the issuance of model cards has been going around. I believe we in the Connecticut AI Working Group have also looked at this idea. However, model cards are not very well defined. There are no all-encompassing generalizable standards for model cards, and different groups look at the specifications and requirements of model cards differently. There is vagueness, there is a little bit of confusion, there's frustration over potential or perceived obstacles towards advancing R&D, research and development. However, on the societal side, there seems to be, at least in the tech community, in the AI engineering and AI research community, there seems to be a consensus that there are risks, short-term risks, in terms of bias, in terms of issues that can occur when the model spits out things that it's not supposed to. There are long-term risks, there are technical risks, and these need to be addressed before those who run fast and break things don't really pay attention to.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and so just to give background on the Artificial Intelligence Working Group was created out of legislation in 2022. So we were the 5th state in the country to pass comprehensive data privacy. As I was working on that legislation, getting near the end of it, I became very interested in automated decision making. We put in a right to opt out of solely automated decisions. So of course, that's a loophole. Most people would just have someone look at it, and it's no longer solely automated. But it was too late to really do more than that, and so we created, as part of the task force, to look at children's data, regulating government use of AI, and automated decision making. And so we started with that working group, and then we passed the bill in 2023 on children's data and also consumer health data. We passed a bill regulating government use of AI and created, again, another working group. I do a lot of working groups to continue looking at the White House blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights and then other issues to look to go from regulating government use to private industry use is natural, right? We're not going to expect more than we're requiring on ourselves, really, and that's the way we were looking at it. As far as other bills that have passed, the EU AI Act is probably the biggest. That'll go into effect in 2026. In addition to the Connecticut Working Group, I'm part of a multi-state working group because the argument is you can't have a patchwork. That was the argument against data privacy. A lot of us who have worked on passing data privacy became very friendly, and so we've been working with over 30 different states, over 100 legislators, bipartisan way. We actually met today for 2 hours. We're continuing that work to try to align, what we'll do with legislation to make it easier for companies to comply across states. So the bill was passed in Colorado. It goes in effect on February 1 of 2026. July 16th, so I think that's next Tuesday, California is voting so California has a privacy protection agency, and they're voting to do rulemaking on automated decision making. And so it'll be another year before their rules are finalized. They had draft that went out in March. Their next draft will be published sometime between now and next Tuesday, which isn't going to substantially change. And again, a lot of these laws, at least in the US, we're relying on the framework from data privacy. Right? We've created this framework of impact assessments to try to measure the impact. And again, it's trying to shift that from the hurry up and break things to the Coach John Wooden had a famous basketball coach, had a saying to move quickly but don't rush. Right? We definitely want to try to yield all of the benefits from AI, but we also want to try to avoid some of the mistakes, right? And try to take that time to pause, to test things, to make sure that they're safe. And you had referenced Pew Research, and each year they do a study on adoption of AI. Over the last 3 years, each year the percentage of Americans who are more optimistic than concerned about AI has gone down to where it's now 10%, whereas 58% of Americans are now more concerned about AI than optimistic about it for the future. And I am in that 10% group, but Maslow's hierarchy, until we feel safe, right, we're not going to see the full adoption. And I think that that's one of the things as we're looking at is how do we make sure that people feel safe?
Can I just add a little bit to this, though, because you had asked about, how things were globally. And the EU has the Digital Safety Act that just went into place. And prior to that, they had the right to be forgotten in place. And they've been more concerned, I think, about the rights of their citizens than I feel in part we have in the US, because they've moved faster than we have. And this is a really interesting conversation because you said 30 states that you're in, 30 states. And this is a problem, right? Let's be honest. This is a problem because it's not moving at the pace that the AI is moving at. And so I always feel like we're a little, I love to be positive about things, but I'm also a realist when it comes to working with students in schools and with educators and in different communities, and watching when technology comes in and whips through a building and nothing actually changes, and then we have more problems after. I'd like to know that we're addressing the problems ahead of the fact that we're dropping them into spaces where we're saying, okay, this is a great tool, you can use it and you can do all these great things, that's great, but what are the consequences as well? And the privacy privacy piece, I think, is a huge thing, because we just had a whole issue happen in Pennsylvania with middle school students, which has been in the news, where they took the images of the teachers and put them on bodies and put these really horrific things out there that were have now impacted not just the privacy of the students, but the teachers as well. And we aren't addressing those issues in a way that I think really matters. And so, you know, when I look at what the EU is doing, you have to accept every piece. You go on a website in the EU, you're accepting that you're going to be in the AI, you're going to accept the cookies, you're going to accept everything. We don't have that here in the US at all. And for the longest time, I feel like we've been the Wild West. I still think we're the Wild West. It's just that, you know, I'm not really sure why the pace is the way it is, but the reality is we know AI is faster. It is moving faster. It has huge potential, huge positive potential, but we also need to think about consequences, especially ethical consequences, because we're dealing with people.
Right. Thank you, sir.
My thoughts on kind of regulation and the pace of regulation, and you guys have already heard my comments, so I'm not going to surprise anyone with where I'm going to go here. You know, I don't think government regulation can ever keep up with the pace of technology innovation. I think that is just a statistical and probable. It's the probability of that happening is zero. And so what I'm trying to encourage is an approach where, look. Bad people are going to do bad things, and technology doesn't absolve them of our laws, does not absolve them of our customs, our culture. What I worry about is this concept that, like, it's because of technology they did bad things. I think it's a tool that needs to be understood. We need to train people how to use it, et cetera, but the challenge I have with this concept of, like, regulate first and figure out later, it's not because I'm anti-regulation. I'm actually pro-regulation. I actually think AI needs to be regulated. I just have this deep fear that we don't know enough yet to do it correctly, to do it thoughtfully, to do it strategically. And I also think it has to, the senator made this point, it's the right one, it has to be done regionally. And here's why. We are in competition with every other state, and I'm a highly competitive person. I wake up every single day thinking, how do I beat Massachusetts, how do I beat New York? And I'm from Massachusetts, and I can't wait to beat the crap out of it. And by the way, we are. Last 2 years in a row, we were the top performing economy in the region. We're back-to-back champs, not just in basketball. And that's an economic growth. We are the only state in the region whose population has gone up every year since the pandemic. Why is that? Because we're winning again. You know, Connecticut went through a tough set of years, all those years post-global financial crisis. And then a pandemic none of us wanted finally was the shock to the system that we needed. And what was a negative reinforcing cycle, people leaving the state, GE leaving, et cetera, is now a positive cycle. People are coming back. We're having a moment right now. So what happened? So Colorado, which by the way told us they weren't going to sign the bill, but they did. And so what's happening now? I'm calling every company, AI company in the state of Colorado and saying, come out to Connecticut. You know, it's much better out here. We just announced a $100 million program to invest in the application of quantum and AI to industries where we have competitive advantage. We're building the workforce of our future to really focus on making sure we take advantage of this economic opportunity, which I think will be in the trillions. So I don't want what I'm saying to come off as anti-regulation or anti-privacy. It's just, I think the opportunity is so large in front of us. I think we have an opportunity to really, the implications for our biggest industries are so profound that I just want to get us thinking about what can we do with this? Yes, we're still going to figure out the problems. If bad people do bad things, we're going to deal with it. But I just don't want to jump in front of it and say we're going to stop everybody from doing everything because bad people might do bad things.
Thank you so much. Okay, so speaking of keeping up with the pace of technology, here's a question for the Commissioner, Dr. Besadan. How do you foresee AI impacting future of work? And particularly in regards to automation, and how are we planning for that?
I'm sorry. I know it's a tough question. If you don't mind, I can elaborate on the question a little bit.
Wait, so you want to take it or you want me to take it?
I can elaborate. That question came from me.
Yeah.
I just want to elaborate on it. I am sorry for bringing that question up because I know it's one of the toughest questions anyone can face in within the scope of things related to AI. AI is the problem of solving problems. As we solve this problem, we are essentially eliminating the need for other, more, as some would put it, costlier problem solvers. In other words, employees. So we are, both of us, Dan and I believe everyone on this panel, we are supporters of advances in AI. It's exciting to us, but eventually, if AI gets to where we, the developers of AI, wanted to get to, what's going to happen to the job market? What's going to happen to the current economic model? And is there anything that we can do now to address it? And the reason I brought up this question is because I don't have an answer to it myself. I really wanted to hear what people who are better experts in this area have to say.
So maybe if I just articulate what I think is the risk and then what I think is the opportunity. And in terms of the risk, if you go back in time and look at what happened with globalization, which was a period of time where labor went where labor was cheap. We allowed borders to open, the free flow of capitalism, and labor flowed, as it does in capitalism, to where that input was at its lowest cost. And it was accelerated by some trade deals that we can look back on and relitigate, but the reality is we didn't train our workforce quickly enough to address what was that incredible dislocation. And I would argue that a lot of the civil unrest that we're seeing now on a global basis is because of that economic shock. I think we're experiencing the echo boom of what happened from the impact of globalization. Now, if you think about what that did to the manufacturing sector, in the state of Connecticut, manufacturing went from 17% of our GDP, 17, to 10% of our GDP in 10 years. That big, loud sucking sound we all heard during those 10 years post-global financial crisis, it wasn't just the financial sector, it was what was happening to our manufacturing sector. And that was, again, that was labor. And ours is principally a service-based economy. So the question, the risk is, what happens if knowledge goes to where knowledge is cheap? The manufacturing sector leaving all of these cities, not just in the state of Connecticut, but it hollowed out a lot of these communities. These communities got more desolate because the industry went away. And if you think about it, I'll say the risk sitting here in Hartford, one of the things that we have in the state of Connecticut that's a real advantage is we have more actuaries per capita than anywhere else in the world. That's just a quirk of our insurance industry being here. What is actuarial math? It's just probabilistic math. I mean, I hate to say it, and there may be actuaries in the room. AI is already better at it than we are, So that's the real risk. Now, of course, I would like to get in front of that, and I would like, if those jobs are going to go where that labor is cheap, it's unfortunate, because I don't want to see the salaries come down, but I'd rather have it happen here than elsewhere. But here's the real opportunity. If you believe, as I do, that inequity is structural, so how do you get some of these higher paying jobs? You go to some of these fancy schools. I went to some, by the way, I grew up in a poor background, but I went to some fancy schools, and now here I am with a microphone in my hand. If you think about getting into some of these schools and getting into these sort of filters where you're able to access some of these higher paying jobs and you start to see inequity get addressed over time, that can become challenging. But what if AI is actually the great equalizer? What if we can teach our constituents how to leverage technology to start to become more competitive in some of these industries of the future? I actually think there's real opportunity there, but I also think we need to start now. I mean, we're already late to this game. And this is really starting to think about teaching our students and our workforce of the future how to start leveraging these technologies to be more competitive.
Wow. Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Do you mind if I
Please.
add on to that? So I just want to say there's good news and bad news, right, about the future of work and the workforce. Technological revolutions are nothing new, right? Going back to the Great Depression, back to when the moving assembly line, they thought that was going to be the end of work. Technological unemployment as a term was coined in the late 1920s, early 1930s. When the internet came out, we thought that was going to be the end of work. When word processors came out, that was going to be the end of work for some people, right? And so the good news is, since all of those revolutions, there have been more jobs created. But now let's go back to, a lot of people will say, it's not AI that's going to take your job, it's someone who knows AI that's going to take your job. But that's also not true. Because what we have to do is we have to step back and realize that there are jobs that are going to be lost. right? There are jobs, and a lot of those jobs, if you look at the percentage of skills, Indeed did a report with their top job postings and the percentage of skills that can be replaced by generative AI. A lot of these are jobs that are traditionally done by women and women of color. Right, and so we need to be very thoughtful with retraining opportunities, looking at the digital equity and the digital divide. They did a survey in Connecticut of 7,000 families. 27% weren't connected to high-speed internet, and we're 98% wired. And then I think it was 36% failed basic digital literacy. So we have to teach people digital literacy, and then we have to teach them AI literacy and get out and work with them. And there's a book, Recode America, on just changing the way government works. And it's a tech book, but also just in general. And one of the things they say is, for a lot of people, we're not creating a new relationship with government. We're repairing a deeply broken relationship, right? In that we have let a lot of people down. And so how do we as a government partner with nonprofits, partner with libraries, partner with boots on the ground in the different communities to get out and help people, to get them connected to high-speed internet, to get them a device if that's what they're lacking, and then to teach the training. And so we are launching, even though the bill we worked on last year that didn't pass, the Connecticut Online AI Academy, we are trying to partner with nonprofits. We got some money to work with nonprofits. The other thing we have to be very thoughtful about is McKinsey came out with a report last December that said if we don't roll out generative AI thoughtfully, it can increase the racial wealth gap by $43 billion every year. Just last month, LinkedIn and Microsoft had a study where they were looking at job postings. Knowledge economy companies, 66% said they wouldn't hire someone without generative AI skills. 71% said they would take someone with less experience in generative AI skills over someone with more experience. And so, to Dan's point, we have 2 years, right? And my concern is if we're not thoughtfully attacking this problem in the next 2 years, we're at risk of, it was a quote someone was talking about, there are two worlds that don't communicate, the rich and the poor. We're going to be creating this permanent two worlds that don't communicate, those who are connected to high-speed internet and have access to training, and those who don't. And that's not the world, that I think any of us here want to live in. And so that's where we need to work together to make sure we're getting those, partnering with people, and how can we reach out and getting ideas for that training.
Yeah. So you've given me a wonderful segue to our next question. And I think it's the biggest question that's probably in all of our minds here tonight. How do you believe that AI could impact elections? And I would like to maybe start with Dr. Abreu.
I think it already is.
Yeah.
So
is impacting elections.
It is. I mean, well, I think, we all know that we have an information ecosystem that's kind of been obliterated with disinformation and misinformation, and you can create it in various forms. I just held a conference overseas, and we did an opening video where we had President Biden, Prime Minister from the UK, and President Macron do the intro to our actual conference. Neither one of them was there. We used AI to digitize their voices and do the welcome. So clearly it's something that's out there and it's accessible. I think the concern, I think that we're seeing a lot more of is the deep fakes. We really are worried about where that could take us. That's not just a national thing, that's an international piece. I think we need to consider how information is evolving, where we're getting it from. Certainly in our younger generation, they're not getting it traditionally the way that we used to get it, and that's something that we need to address more so now. I know there's a lot of talk about whether or not TikTok will exist a year from now, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter. This is where the platforms are, the social media platforms, and they're also being conducted by AI and algorithms and so forth. And so we need to understand the systemic biases. We need to understand the individual biases, and we need to understand how information is transmitted and developed. And frankly, we need media literacy education.
Absolutely. Senator.
I don't know how I follow. No, I think, I mean, I guess one of the downsides of AI is the ability to personalize and spread mass disinformation at scale quickly, in that it sounds believable. I think that the deep fakes in politics we're all concerned about. There's a legitimate company, it's called Civox, where you can train an AI on your platform and your voice and have it robocall and identify voters for you. Now, they do disclose that it is an AI and not, and so, but if you can do that with a legitimate company, you can obviously do things that will go off the rails. But again, I think being in government, we're all focused on elections. I think one of the biggest risks is also deepfake non-consensual intimate images, right? Looking at over 96% of deepfakes wouldn't even necessarily be revenge porn, but it's creating naked pictures, and the victims are traditionally young women. It was in New Jersey in the high schools where they took the yearbook photos and they spread those around, and it's happened in Connecticut. I know of a town in Connecticut where it happened to five people, and so that is something we need to address, is the deep fakes in campaigns, but also those non-consensual intimate images.
Commissioner?
Out of this a little bit, but I think the internet did to our political discourse what it does to everything, which is it disintermediated it. It federates the amount of nodes that contribute to it, and then it allows the free flowing of those bits in an amplified fashion. What's the net result of that? The internet has become an echo chamber with a negative bias. And what I mean by that is anyone who's ever searched for medical information online knows exactly what I'm talking about. You search for "my elbow hurts," and you get to cancer in like 2 seconds. And it's because if you think about it, if you have a problem, you talk about it, you vent about it. If things go great, you don't publish anything about it, you don't hear about it. So what happens with this like free flowing of discourse that is disintermediated without an editorial lens is you end up with the bad stuff and the amplified stuff. And this is actually not partisan. This is far left and this is far right, getting more and more quarter than it ever used to. Having the crazies is not new. The crazies were always there. We just never used to hear about them. And now what's happening is it's the psychological reason why we slow down when we're driving by a car accident. It's just human nature. You slow down and you look at the thing that's not good. And I want to try to turn this into a slight positive, which is, by the way, because I don't know what the solution is, except for people starting to understand and get trained over time that, okay, that isn't necessarily factual. That isn't necessarily a real image or a real voice. That's just going to, unfortunately, take some time because I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle. But now let me give a slight positive. I spent a lot of time talking to people about companies about coming to Connecticut from outside the state, from outside the country. And one of the things I'm hearing more now is, well, I'll give a specific example. We're talking to a European-based company about establishing operations in Connecticut. Very high-profile company. CEO, founder comes over, and I'm ready to talk about, I had my whole presentation on the economy of Connecticut, all the things that we're seeing that's great, our workforce, why you want to be here, et cetera. And he said, I don't want to talk about any of that. He said, from where I sit, I'm just going to tell you the U.S. looks like one large dumpster fire, right? Because he's just seeing all the headlines. And he said, I want to talk about, is Connecticut a place where my employees are going to feel safe and are going to want to live? Is it a place where I can do business, where I can have a predictable environment? And what's funny is, I don't think our governor ever set out to think he was creating a differentiation by simply showing what quiet excellence looks like from the center. And the reality is the vast majority, again, the crazies were always there, but the vast majority of our populace, and this isn't just Connecticut, this is throughout our country, are from the center. They might be center right, they might be center left, but they're generally in the center. We're a country of relatively rational, reasonable people. And so I think actually Connecticut is showing that you can actually do this. You can actually have a robust growing economy. You can actually have consistent, balanced budgets. I joke, and the governor hates this joke, that he should be everyone's favorite Republican governor, because he's continuing to show that you can actually have societal progression. You can actually have and defend progressive values, but do it in a way that's economically sound. While I lament what is happening broadly, I also just want to recognize that it doesn't have to be that way. You can actually have excellence from the center.
So I would like to follow up and talk about the free flow of information. The platforms in which the information flows on the internet are firm believers in the principle that states there is no free lunch. There is no free flow of information on those platforms. The information that is presented to social media users, news media users these days, or any sort of organized systematic information sharing platform is controlled by algorithms that aim to optimize for a certain objective. And more often than not, even if the platform is run by a nonprofit, I've heard this counterintuitive claim that nonprofits still need to make a profit to survive. So these algorithms that present the information to you aim to keep you engaged or aim to provoke a certain type of response. Now, the bigger issue, in my opinion, is the engineers on the design and development side of these algorithms miss out on a very important fact. They design the algorithms to react to the human users, but they forget that the human user can also be affected, can be conditioned by what's happening through the output of the algorithm. And this, I believe, is where we come back to the issue of elections. Optimized algorithms, regardless of what the optimization objective is, can end up changing the minds of the voters, the citizens. And that's a big issue. It's not necessarily as dire and as, I'm sorry for using this word for the lack of a better word, as shiny as deepfakes. I know that deepfakes are a big issue, particularly when it comes to fraudulently or unethically imitating or synthetically creating fake poses of people who have not given consent. But I think the bigger issue is the way simpler algorithms, old-fashioned algorithms, moderate and modulate the not so free flow of information on these platforms. Now, I want to quickly follow up on a positive note. Again, I come from a technical background, and there are a lot of exciting things happening on the technical side of AI, one of which is about the access that the voters can have to the mindset of a candidate. I have this friend who's running who will be running for a seat in the Canadian Parliament, and he had this idea of creating a chatbot that allows the constituents of his city to ask him questions about different topics and be able to have discussions with that chatbot, which is a scalable, always available, partial clone of that candidate. And this idea can also be used in two-way conversations, particularly debates. What if a question that is really important to you never comes up in a candidate debate? Can this be done via digital clones in the form of chatbots? I'm not entirely sure if the answer to this question is yes, just yet. But if it is, and if the chatbots can respond in exactly the same way as a candidate would respond, why would we need the flesh and bone candidate? We can just use the chatbot. Yes.
Right. Thank you. I did ask you once, Senator, when you think we're going to see an AI senator. And you said okay, thank you so much, all of you. We are running a little bit over time, but before we open it up to questions, I would just like to ask you generally as a sort of closing remarks, what do you foresee as the future of AI and how citizens engage with it in their civic lives?
I was going to say we will see. I don't know if I have an answer for that, to be honest with you. I think it depends on what the next 2 years brings, truly. I think it depends on how we as people feel 2 years from now with whatever AI is out there. I think that the human factor is always going to be the most prevalent, most important piece, and I think we need to recognize that. I think when we forget that, we lose out more to this machine learning piece, and frankly, to not recognizing the value of what we as humans still offer that AI does not.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to build on that one of the things is the ability to hopefully have AI and learn how to use it to do the drudge tasks, right? The repetitive tasks that we don't like, to free us to do more of those human tasks. And to get to a point where Thomas Friedman, in his book, Thank You for Being Late, he says shifting from AI to IA, so from artificial intelligence to an intelligent assistant, right? And that's what we really want to get to, recognizing, as Dan said before, that this is a tool. Right? It's not going to replace, but hopefully it'll augment, but also that we are thoughtful in how we roll this out to make sure that everyone can benefit, right? That a rising tide raises all ships and we're not leaving people behind. I do think we do need to look at, again, the Maslow's hierarchy, that people need to feel safe. You mentioned the GDPR in Europe, and one of the things we've seen that actually good regulations are good for business. And there was an article by a professor from Yale who had said that when people feel safe with their data, they're more likely to share it. And then Apple came out with their changes to require everything opt-in. And we saw in Europe, people opted in at twice the rate they did in the US because they had the GDPR. So I think, how do we work together to craft regulations that make people feel safe but allow for innovations?
Thank you. Commissioner?
You know, if I look over the course of my investing career, every wave of technology innovation was dramatically larger than the last. And the reason why that is each one is based on the network effects of the one prior to it. So what I mean by that is, you know, client server got swamped by sort of desktop internet and desktop computing, then the mobile internet and mobile computing, and it's because it's based on the innovation of the wave prior to it. What I'm seeing right now, and I don't want to sound like arm wavy, but I think it is actually the biggest opportunity, economic opportunity I've ever seen in the course of my career. And I think it's $1 trillion economic opportunity. So I think it's just an incredibly exciting time for us. And again, if I look at our economy, the fastest growing sector we have is the information sector. It's by an order of magnitude. And it's because we have real competitive strengths. We have an incredibly talented and highly skilled workforce. We have an opportunity to really take advantage, be a state that benefits not just from these hybrid work trends, and we are benefiting from it, but also benefits from our largest industries innovating in some of these ways. So that's why, as you can tell, I'm trying to get us really thinking front-footed, because sometimes I feel like we're our own biggest skeptics. Like, as I travel around, I get all of this skepticism, and again, I know why it exists. But my point is, things are really good right now. I want to get us thinking in much more of an investor mindset. And if you're still skeptical, despite all the data, et cetera, that's fine. Just get out of the way. Because I think, you know, we want to invest against these trends. We want to be making sure we're taking advantage of it and not squandering what I think is a unique moment for Connecticut.
Thank you. Doctor?
So I'm not really sure how reliable it is to think of AI in 10 years, 20 years, 100 years as a mere tool and not an entity. I think that's where it's evolving towards. And I don't want to make this into a philosophical statement, but going back to the definition of AI, at the very high level, the way I teach it to my students is AI is the non-organic implementation of organic intelligence. Is there anything special about organic intelligence that cannot be implemented in a non-organic way? Evidence suggests that there is no magic in the organic, the naturalness of the substrate. But on the positive side, over the next few years, we are going to see a Cambrian explosion of creativity, productivity, but there will be a tipping point. And I think we need to start thinking about that tipping point early on. Issues like bias, issues like deepfakes are tactically important, but there are strategic risks that I think we I on the research side and the legislative side and the executive side should start thinking about now, before it's too late, before we are already in the heavy flow of, the unstoppable growth point to, we don't want it to become a race to the bottom that will inevitably lose.
Wow, thank you. Quite a point to end on. Thank you so much, all of you. That was really, really fascinating. We are going to open it up now to questions from the audience. If we have okay, thank you so much. Just remember to raise your hand and wait for the mic if you have a question. Go ahead.
Hello. I wanted to thank you all for speaking, and thank you, Senator Maroney, for being very clear in your language regarding generative AI versus AI in general. It irks me whenever people say AI in general, because I'm working computing, so it's, there was a recent report, and this is mimicking language that has come from computing professionals and, a lot of remarks on this, that AI, Goldman Sachs just put out a report like last week that said that generative AI especially is not the future, or at the very least in its current form, it's just a dead end. It's energetically expensive. It costs more than humans in terms of its output. Its output isn't reliable. It just is not really the future in terms of investment. A lot of companies are currently investing. The company I work at is currently investing in AI, but it seems more and more evidence seems to show that it just isn't really the path forward. So how is the state of Connecticut shifting in accommodation from this new wave of thought that generative AI especially is just not going to be a productive, economically productive force for the people?
I'll say one, thank you. I agree. I think ChatGPT and others are parlor tricks compared to the true power that we're going to see unleashed over the coming years. And as you mentioned, I think Nick D'Onofrio, who is one of the co-chairs of our AI task force, former IBM executive, head of worldwide research at IBM, he feels the future for the generative AI is smaller models because of how you mentioned, right? There's the data privacy issues, the bias issues, the energy consumption, right? It takes $2 million to train, like for a day, just millions of dollars to train that. And there have been studies where they've looked at if you train smaller models for specific purposes, using targeted data sets, they're just as effective, right? So, and then if you can use the open source, and again, that's why we try to exempt, when we look at the regulations, exempt the open source AI, because that's really, we feel most of the innovation is going to come from for the future. Certain requirements, but less requirements on that, because again, the goal is testing for when you're making in a risk-based approach, right? Looking at, if you're making an important decision about someone's life, you should test it, right? And looking at the studies that come in, over 80% of companies right now are using AI for screening resumes. Yard Matrix surveyed large landlords. 75% expect to use AI to screen tenants in the next 2 years. We've already seen lots of examples of bias, right? There's the 2018 Amazon when they released their algorithm that, because most technologists, again, studying the past to predict the future, most technologists are men. It determined it wanted men in a technology job. And so if you were on the women's soccer team, your resume got kicked out, right? So these are things we need to test to make sure we're not limiting opportunities. Bias can impact everyone there. So I think as far as from the regulatory piece is just looking at making sure it's flexible if we build something, and looking at a risk-based approach. What is the highest risk right now to allow for some of that flexibility in innovation. I think we do need to do more. DECD is working, does a lot of great work with companies. And so one of the goals over the next year is we sent out a survey to 80 businesses through let's just send it to thousands, but 80 responded on CBIA. Do you expect to use AI in the next 5 years? Half of them said no. Again, it's back to the vocabulary. We had to be more clear. What do we mean? You're already using it. You're using it in Microsoft Outlook, in all these different things. But what we're doing this year is we're going to go and interview 20 manufacturing businesses to talk to them and tease it out, to figure out where can we use this, how can we help you in your processes, and then go back and look at the legislation, because big companies are going to figure this out. Small businesses need our help. right? And the power of the state is to aggregate resources. So through creating the Connecticut Online AI Academy, it's free. It's going to be free for everyone to do that training. It'll launch at the end of this summer. The goal is eventually, again, we don't want to create courses to become a repository. So focusing on workforce, but then also focusing on helping the businesses who are going to have trouble implementing it to implement it.
Thank you so much.
So I haven't seen the report. I would love to read it. I look forward to doing so. But I wonder how well it's going to age. To me, it's a little bit like this. Back when the desktop computer first emerged, there were all these quotes about, well, I think the worldwide market for a desktop computer is like 4 people, and that obviously didn't age well. And if I look at technology trends over time, the cost of inputs do tend to come down with greater scale. So we'll see. But it does bring up. I'll come back to you. I know you disagree. It does bring up another interesting question, which we haven't talked about, which is, I do view energy and its price / cost as the greatest existential risk to our economic progression for 2 reasons. First is we have a manufacturing-based GDP. So now I mentioned it was as high as 17%, but it's still 12%. For us, it's manufacturing is really our companies in support of our national defense, but still it's a high energy input. Our energy costs industrial energy costs are over 100% higher than the US average. Lots of reasons why that is, but we have a challenge in that one of our core sectors, really our core sector, is challenged by those prices. And if I'm right, and you might be, and I might be wrong, but if I'm right, and some of these higher energy use cases around innovation require lower energy prices to be competitive, then we have a real issue. Please, you had a follow-up.
Oh yeah, I mean, you said that technology always kind of has been, but blockchain, NFTs, that's the most recent one, and that just ended up going to trash, right? So what's your...
Disagree. I think NFTs, does everyone know what NFTs are? Non-fungible tokens, everybody knows. Okay, so NFTs, and I think a lot of the, the things that blockchain enabled were speculative. Bitcoin was speculative, but I think blockchain, I would submit that blockchain has real implications. I mean, I think having a distributed mechanism for, to allow things in like the fintech industry, et cetera, I wouldn't say blockchain is done. I still actually pretty optimistic about it.
Okay, so we are running a little bit short on time. Maybe we have time for 2 more questions.
Very, very quickly, I actually teach political science at the University of Hartford, and I was very happy to hear the question about elections. My sense, given the state of our current political system, that you guys have probably underestimated the harm that AI may have in our political system going forward. And so, but my question really is about an ethical dimension around the use of AI, which I heard the word ethics used by a number of people on the panel, but for me, as a professor, and your comment brought this out for me, so I'm seeing an increasing number of students who can barely do prose on an essay, on an exam, who write research papers that look like they've been done by college professors. And that's going to increase. It's already a problem in the K through 12 system in terms of using AI to create papers. I do wonder about sending them into the world and what they will do, given the fact that we haven't figured out how to really deal with it yet as an institution. We're going to talk before the semester starts about how we can get them to think about, okay, you're going to start it by maybe using AI, but don't use AI to write your paper, but it can help you generate some wonderful ideas. But I do wonder about the ethical dimension, because these are the folks who will go out into the real world, they will go into corporate America, they will go into government. Will they have the ethics that are necessary to know when to do the application of AI and be willing to disclose what they've done? At this point, I am really not convinced that we have a handle on getting people to understand what are the correct uses, when it should be used, and that's my worry. You know, I'm like everybody else. The potential benefits, potential harms, I don't have solid answers on. But what I do believe is that if a police department can solve crimes by using facial recognition and AI in various kinds of ways that ultimately are harmful to communities of color, for example, they will do it because at the end of the day, they could get the check off the boxes for how many crimes have been reduced and what they're able to do in their community, regardless of the harm it will create for people who are under greater surveillance and criminalization within our society. I feel the same way about issues around inequality. There's a level of intentionality that I'm not convinced our political system has to do the kind of hard work that will need to be done to create that equity and to create the equality that needs to happen as we move increasingly into this arena. So I'm less confident of what the future holds because I'm not sure that we're really grappling with that ethical question about and really getting people out there who will do the right thing with this technology.
So I'm 100%, if I may, I 100% agree with you. I want to do a little cheer right now because this is literally the things that I've been dealing with. So, I love to be positive every day along with, a lot of you, Dan, I really would. But the reality is I want people to be able to think. And what I worry about right now is that if what you're experiencing at the college level, which I'm experiencing as well, I teach media literacy at Sacred Heart University, ChatGPT became the dominant feature of my classes that I decided this semester, I'm not doing any papers at all this coming semester. I need to figure out how I can get my students to think about the issues that we're discussing before they run to ChatGPT and ask it to think for them. This is where I think media literacy education is super important. I want to think about the ecosystems that we're in. I want to think about how information is out there. I want people to think about that. I want the new parent who's going to have the baby coming up in their prenatal classes to sit down and, as part of prenatal classes, understand how technology will be forevermore a part of their child's lives and their lives moving forward. And what does that mean? What are the consequences of that? I think we have let too many things sort of run their course, right? We've allowed, when iPads came out, everybody thought iPads was going to change education. We distributed iPads to everybody. Great. We have Chromebooks in schools right now. We give them to kids because we're like, oh, it's the great equalizer. It is absolutely not the great equalizer. All it is done is used for testing purposes. It has no translatable skills to any other computer technology if we really were to sit down and think about it. But it's cheap, it's easy, and we use it, right? So now we're at this mode. Okay, so here we are with AI. And this is where my concern stems in. Ethics has to be a component to it because you're right, and we're going to have check boxes at the end of our papers that say to the students are going to say, I use ChatGPT to create my paper, but it's acceptable because I told you so. I don't think so, right? And I think these are the things that we aren't addressing. So it is an amazing tool. I think it's amazing what people can do. But I also think that the amazement is less when you start to wonder whether or not 10 years from now, someone can actually come up with a topic for a conversation or a topic for an idea or for something that they want to design, and they don't know how to do it themselves, but they have to ask a machine to do it for them. So there's a lot that I think needs to be considered, and I think this is the one thing I always say to someone when people ask me about it all the time. I'm like, are we talking about ethics? I think it's great. Let's throw another piece of technology at the next generation. But what is the ethical end result, right? We already know that with iPads, we've lost certain nuances with kids. They use the touch screens, they don't play as much, they don't use their fingers as much, they don't use manipulative as much, they don't have conversations as much. There's a whole thing going on right now. There's a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Haidt who wrote a book, The Anxious Generation, and he's been all over the media talking about getting smartphones out of schools. I think we need to have a little bit more of a balanced conversation about that too, because there's a good reason for it and there's bad reasons for it too. But I do think at the end of the day, there's got to be more of an even line to have these discussions so that we're not so pie in the sky and thinking it's going to solve the world, it's going to be great, everyone's going to be happy. There are a lot of people who are not going to be happy 10 years from now because there will be something lost.
Thank you. Quickly, please.
So I hear you. I'm also in a college environment. I see how my students are using ChatGPT, and I think what I'm missing is I don't show them how to use it better. I think ethics and ethical systems are evolutionary. They are not fixed, and I believe that we need to understand the utility of what we aim to do and the utility of the tools that are available. How can they help us achieve that objective? I personally don't think that we should take a driving test in a self-driving car. And I believe that if thinking and writing is important, if attribution is important, and if this tool is generally available, it might be a good idea to see how we can think a little outside the box to, instead of banning it or calling it unethical, come up with ways that are more compatible with reality and things that will inevitably happen. I'm sorry it took so long,
No,
but thank
that's
you.
all right. Okay, we're going to do 2 more questions. Please make them brief, and only one speaker will be answering the question.
I'd like to get back to the government part. I came from a very technical side and did AI. I worked on the Deep Blue project, which beat the world champion in chess. I worked at the IBM Research Labs. This was back in the 90s. My project after that was very interesting, working as an economist, was to analyze a little village in Virginia called Blacksburg. It's part of Virginia Tech. It was the BEV project. They were literally the first town to be on the internet. And they did it so well in terms of their town policy and so on, that they had 50% of their population on the internet wicked fast for a town to come. And then they got into the Guinness Book of World Records as the most wired town in the whole world. It's all there. I mean, you can Google it or go to Wikipedia. My question is what I analyzed was the way they did it. They did it from the ground up. They didn't have a highbrow, self-anointed pontiff, that Saturn and Pontiff, oh, they need this and they need that and so on. They did it from the ground up. They got the teachers to be part of the decision-making, media, college professors and so on, and they were very fortunate to have Virginia Tech, which is it's a big technical school. So I think that element is missing, and I think Europe is going in the wrong path in that. Everything is very highbrow. You have 20 countries sitting down and saying that's what they need and so on. And going back to ethics, to be honest with you, I'm more concerned about ethics in healthcare than about ethics in writing a term paper. And it's a huge issue because it causes health disparities and health inequities, and I've done a lot of work in that, including getting legislation for minority health and so on. So my question really is the policy-making process itself. The government, it has to be more grounds up. I will not pose that a question. I know I mentioned it to you. Before SB2 in 2019, the first AI bill in Connecticut was 6187. I have it here, which was the first AI bill in 2019, and I was the only one to submit a testimonial. The bill didn't pass, but that's fine. But I'm glad SB2, I'm glad SB2 went, and I'm quite, working on another one. But it is important that it's from the grounds up. We get more input from the grassroots. Otherwise, we'll end up like Europe. My question is really, my question was, how would you change the policy-making process? That's probably, I know I've mentioned this to you before our talk this evening.
So
Thank you.
I'm going to agree and then push back. Okay, so I agree that you need to incorporate diverse voices. My son's a senior in high school. He just graduated. One of his college essay questions is, what's something interesting you learned in school? And so he wrote about Bletchley Park, right? And so how did we break the German Enigma code? He brought together puzzlers, chess players, Navajo speakers, as well as traditional military cryptographers. And the lesson is diverse voices, right? And so McKinsey had a book called Rewired on preparing for the digital revolution. They found that companies that embrace DEI have I think 26% higher return on their investment. And so again, why? Diverse voices, more perspectives. And so we have tried that, and have done that, I would say, with this bill. I've had more testimony and more public meetings than almost any other bill. I would challenge you to find one that has had more. You just can't incorporate all 3.6 million citizens into writing the bill, but we have run working groups, and I've been working for 3 years. I'm in my 4th year. Multi-state working groups. We've brought in professors. We've brought in businesses. We've communicated with businesses. We do probably need more of the actual people who are going to get impacted, and I think everything is hearts and minds. So I think that people coming in and share their story of how they were harmed is probably something to look at, unfortunately. But we can always do better. We can always do more. But I think that we are working very hard to incorporate diverse voices, because I do believe that. Yeah. And it's not just, as I said, not just Connecticut. We're working together with, and because we don't have faith in the federal government to act. The last major comprehensive privacy legislation that was passed in the United States by the federal government was COPPA in 1998. And we can see the harms that have come to children and to others online since then. And that's why the states were working together. Texas, Republican states, Democratic states, we're working together because we don't want to repeat that mistake, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And so, we're meeting for the next 5 months, twice a month. There are 40 people on the call. Our email list is much wider, to try to come up with a solution that will work across states, because again, we don't have that faith in the federal government to act.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so just one more question, and please make it brief. Thank you.
I'll make it as brief as possible. Oh, these are hard to speak into. So I really do want to focus in on the government aspect, since that is what we were discussing. In regards to the relationship between government and AI and ethics. So a government is meant first and foremost to serve its people. It deals in civic affairs, how people are organized, how people gain assistance, how we're able to actually communicate directly with the people who are responsible for taking care of us. If we're starting to integrate AI, well, what is the extent that you reasonably think we can integrate AI into government without compromising that direct connection between people that government serves?
Thank you.
Yeah. Did you want? Okay. No, thank you. And I think that's a very important point. We're in government. Our success is not measured in market opportunities and dollars. It's in the lives of the people who are governed, and making sure that we're impacting them positively and trying to help make sure that they can live to their fullest, right? The best thing you can give someone is an opportunity, so that we're providing opportunities, mitigating downsides. I think that's part of the reason why we did have the law, to try to make sure that we are using it ethically or responsibly, right? And that we're disclosing where we're using it, so that citizens can know that. I think that also we do have, have a responsibility to manage your tax dollars well. And so looking at ways, are there efficiencies that we can get that don't impact those consequential decisions, those important things that impact your life every day? Access to government services, right? Access to Medicaid, food, SNAP benefits, education, right? Deciding who gets admitted to schools and if it's being used, understanding why and how, and rights to appeal. But are there ways we can use it to facilitate communication? You mentioned training a chatbot out. That could potentially be dangerous, but there are ways, as long as you're disclosing, right, that you're not interacting with me. If it were a chatbot, it may make it easier for you to get information as a citizen. Another thing, where I see we may be able to use it, and again, testing it, right, to make sure that there aren't disparate impacts on different groups. But looking at, when I talked about tax dollars, looking at auditing, right? If there are ways to enhance revenue collections, right? These are things, but again, making sure that there's not a disparate impact. We're not only auditing certain groups and not other groups, but so it can indicate and find out ways to improve those efficiencies, right? So that is, you mentioned that's a tough question, right? And that's what we have to deal with in government is how do we responsibly use it? How do we model responsible behavior, right? And that's the other thing. And one of the things, as legislators, I was at a conference, and Valerie Gato, she's a legislator from Pennsylvania, she said, and she wasn't the first one to say it, she was the first one I heard say it, so I don't want people to think I made it up, I try to quote that. But she said, as legislators, we have 3 ways to impact our constituents: regulation, legislation, communication, right? And so that's the other thing. How do we utilize communication and model good behaviors? So one of the things I'm working on, and I'm going to be sharing it with other legislators actually around the country as well as in Connecticut, is an AI August outreach campaign, right? We have an email blast. How do we use our platform, right, to communicate to people on lessons of how they can use it to help make their lives easier? And I do think that we probably have to do one now. We're trying to go positive, harms, and then how I'm using it, interviewing people, right? So every day we'll put out a different message. But I do think pointing to some of these responsible use courses. And so that's what we're trying to look at and curate, some of these courses that are out there. But I agree with you, and actually thank you for bringing up that ethical or responsible use. So my friend, Delegate Maldonado from Virginia, she said, say responsible use, because unfortunately ethics have somehow become politicized. Yeah. So, but that responsible use. So thank you. It's not an easy question. It's something we're going to have to try to figure out together, and we're going to make mistakes.
Okay. Thank you so much. And yeah, I do apologize that we're running a little bit over time here and that we don't have more time for questions. I do apologize. But thank you so much for all of our panelists for being here for this wonderful conversation. Thank you, all of you.